We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become?
Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Hey Weirdos, this is Andrew coming at you with a couple of quick messages before this week's episode. So the first one I want to talk about is our Patreon. On it, there will be a poll that will determine July's theme. So there will be about 3 or 4 choices. I'm actually creating the poll right now. Well, not literally right now, but you get the message. And it should be up by the time this episode airs. So if you are a Patreon member, go ahead and vote right now. The poll will close 2 weeks from today, the release of this episode, June 3rd. So again, go ahead, and if you're a Patreon member, go ahead and vote. And if you're not a Patreon member, then you can go ahead and sign up. Now, for the second announcement, Stephanie and I are taking the month of June off, and we'll be re-releasing some of our very favorite episodes that we have ever done. This week, we will be covering Lawrence of Arabia, or, how he was known back in his day as T.E. Lawrence. This is one of my favorite episodes that I think I've ever done because I learned so much about him during my research. It was also a little bit difficult because there were so many different pieces, I think, that said either conflicting or somewhat conflicting things, and I kind of had to parse together these sources to create like a coherent narrative that was actually interesting to listen to, right? And I was pretty proud of my work there. Also, I was recovering from the flu, so in retrospect, Stephanie probably should have taken over this week, but here I am, talking through the flu, and I think this is probably one of the first episodes where I felt like a great sense of satisfaction doing it. So I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I had creating it. Without further ado, let's talk about T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia.
Hello and welcome to History for Weirdos.
We're your hosts, Andrew
and Stephanie,
and each week we're going to take you on a journey into the strange, obscure, and relentlessly entertaining corners of human history.
Now listen up, friends, because it's about to get weird. We are back with another History for Weirdos episode.
Woohoo!
The woohoo sounded so disingenuous.
I was completely not disingenuous. Was it ingenuous? No, genuous.
Genuine.
Wow, I'm dumb. Okay. I mean, everyone, I've had the flu, so that's, and I'm still recovering from it. So I think I'm operating at 50% right now.
Yes, Andrew got really sick last week. You've had the flu pretty badly. And I was like, you know what? I think you should do this week's episode.
Yeah, I know. It's like, you know what? I'm not going to write another episode and I'm just going to have you do it.
I think you should put in the work and I think you should spend the majority of this episode talking.
Because that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, but so sorry we didn't have an episode last week. Lots of crazy stuff. Some good, some bad. You all know how it goes.
Yeah.
Mostly good stuff, though. I had some events for a random, it has nothing to do with History for Weirdos, but I wrote a mental health poetry book. And so I had some like book events, which was great, but it took up a lot of time. We will share a link if anyone is like even remotely interested or wants to go laugh at me or something. We'll share a link.
No, Stephanie did an incredible job reading her poems in front of like a whole like pretty large group of people.
Thank you.
And I mean, she even got an encore. I'm not joking. Like people literally wanted more. They screamed more.
They were not screaming. They're
Okay,
like...
there's a few people that like yelled quite or aggressively said more. Because like she was like, I'm just gonna read one, and they're like more.
Yeah, it was really fun. And Andrew, you were such a good support. I get very nervous with public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
The podcast doesn't feel like public speaking at all because we're sitting in our living room and just chatting. But speaking in front of an audience is definitely nerve-wracking. So it like completely drained me last week.
Right.
And we just had so much going on, and then Andrew got sick, and here we are, full circle.
Here we are, yeah. Okay, so...
Enough rambling.
Should we get down to business?
Yes, please tell us, what is this week's topic?
Okay, so this is a man, so not an event. This is a man.
Okay.
20th century, so
very modern for you.
Very modern for me.
Mm-hmm.
Set in like the World War I era.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, this is probably one of the most historical or most interesting historical characters I have ever researched. And when you ever think of someone who's like the main character, quote unquote,
right,
it's this dude. And, before I even get into the story, I actually have to admit something. So I heard of our subject's name, and, ever since childhood. And to be honest, I didn't think he was even a real person until I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just thought he was a made up, like, fictional person because his story is pretty fantastical.
Okay.
And because even his name now is quite literally like legendary. To quote Barney, legend, wait for it, dairy.
Barney the dinosaur?
Yes. That's definitely Barney the dinosaur.
You heard it here first, folks.
Legend, wait for it, dairy. Barney the dinosaur.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so before I go on, do you have any guesses at this point?
Someone, okay.
A dude,
No.
World War I.
You want to know what first came to mind?
Who?
I don't know if it was Joey Tribbiani from Friends.
It's not Joey Tribbiani.
But some character like that, or like Andy from Parks and Rec. Someone said something like they thought reindeer weren't real because they're like Santa's creatures, and that for some reason I was like, is he going to talk about reindeer?
That's a good episode, though. No, but it's not reindeer. It's one person.
Reindeer are pretty cool. A person that you thought was not real
Until college.
Kind
of embarrassing, honestly.
Because they're legendary. No, I can't think of anyone that I've also thought potentially wasn't real, but they are.
Okay. No, it's okay, because his name is T.E. Lawrence, but he's better known as Lawrence of Arabia.
I also did not think he was a real person until just now.
Right? Because okay,
that's not a storybook?
It's no. I mean, yes and no. It is, but it's about his real life experiences.
Really? I thought it was like a fantasy book.
Yeah,
and then a movie and a video game.
It is a movie, and we'll get into all of this.
Okay.
And in fact, it is video. A few years ago when there was a World War I video game that came out, which is pretty unique because it's always about World War II.
Always, yeah.
World War I was always forgotten about, and I think it was called Battlefield 1 or I forgot. But anyways, one of the missions you play is T.E. Lawrence.
Really?
Yeah, pretty cool. So his life is insane.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I gather.
Yeah, like he started life in controversy, even like as he was born out of wedlock, which
dang,
I know, and he's British, and this is Victorian England, so this is bad.
This is not good.
Sir Thomas Chapman, 7th Baronet, he was a married man, and he left his wife to cohabitate with his mistress / Lawrence of Arabia's mother, Sarah Juner.
Oh, but he actually left his wife.
He left.
Wow.
And they cohabitated and everything. And
so they were living in sin in Victorian era England?
Yes.
Wow.
Salacious.
We were living in sin once.
Yes, many moons ago.
Many moons ago.
Now we're married.
Boring.
Boring. Lawrence's parents, so they'd never married, but they lived happily together under the pseudonym of Lawrence. His family moved around quite a bit during his childhood, and all of this traveling possibly could have inspired him to travel a lot more in his younger adult years, which is going to be important for the story. And again, like I had mentioned, Victorian/Edwardian Britain was a very conservative society where the majority of people were, fundamentalist Christian, I guess is the best way to put it.
Okay.
Who considered premarital and extramarital sex to be shameful and children born out of wedlock to be born in disgrace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's blame babies.
Let's blame the babies because, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So Lawrence, of course, was always, something of an outsider, a bastard who can never hope to achieve the same level of social acceptance and success that others could expect who were born legitimately. And no girl from a respectable family would ever, marry a bastard.
That's so crazy.
It's insane. So, and again, this is, I wrote a note in my notes that like this may have caused him to be sympathetic to people who were being oppressed. I'll let you decide that. And again, that comes up later in the story. He spent a lot of his teenage years being fascinated with history.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
He
Oh my
would
gosh.
listen to this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. He would have listened to this podcast maybe.
Definitely.
So, in fact, he spent the summers of 1906 and 1907 when he was like, like a teenager, I think, traveling around the countryside and trying to find historical artifacts and antiquities because, it's England. And
oh, yeah.
so
you could do that.
You could do that. I know. It's crazy. We can't do that here in Los Angeles.
No.
They would often watch over, building sites, right? Because, when they'd have to excavate a little bit, right? Before they'd make a building. And they would take anything that was ancient over to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, which is like which is a pretty famous museum.
That's so cool.
And in fact, there is still a report by the Ashmolean Museum that there's a portion of that report that reads that 2 teenage boys, quote, by incessant watchfulness secured everything of antiquarian value which has been found. And one of those boys was, of course, T.E. Lawrence.
Incessant watchfulness.
Yeah.
That's so passive aggressive.
Dude,
these kids were annoying.
Yeah, they're like, it kind of reminds me of Indiana Jones, where it's like, it belongs in a museum. When he says that, I'm like, God, I love this kid. I love this guy.
Yeah, what an interesting teenager.
And in fact, he would go on to study history in college at the Jesus College of Oxford.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that was a thing.
Oxford is, I think, really weird. It's unlike American universities. Like there's colleges within the university and they almost operate like autonomously.
There's the at Columbia, there's Barnard, which similarly, it's like its own college. And then there's Teachers College, which also and they have their own little cute campuses. They function separately, and I always thought that was weird.
Yeah, I think it's probably like a holdover from like the olden days,
the days of yore.
The days of yore, yes. To go on the Friends like binge, Friends like continuity.
Yes,
whatever. Guys, I have the flu. To give me a break. So in July and August of 1908, he cycled 2,200 miles, or about 3,500 kilometers, solo through France to the Mediterranean and back, researching French castles.
That's so cute.
I know, and I think specifically he specialized in 14th century castles,
right?
Because as one does.
Because you need to find your niche. That is the marketing key.
Marketing
step
101.
number 1.
Yeah.
Identify your niche.
I know.
And his was 14th century castles.
But I wouldn't go too much into the niche because in the following summer of 1909, he set out alone on a 3-month walking tour of Crusader castles in Ottoman Syria, during which he traveled 1,000 miles or 1,600 kilometers on foot. During this time, he was shot at, robbed, and beaten, which sadly would become a theme.
What?
Yes.
Okay. Question.
Yes. Right. I'm not even in the meat of the story. I'm still setting this up, and it's already insane.
Like, I'm fascinated by his ability to, the Joseph Campbell quote, follow your bliss.
Yeah.
He's doing that at a very young age. He's like, these are the things that are interesting to me.
Yeah.
And whether it's like on bike or on foot, I'm just going to dedicate my days to learning more and exploring. Like, that's so cool. But question is, how does he have money?
I just think so. Remember, his dad was a baronet.
But he didn't lose his title, you think?
No, I don't think he did.
Oh, he just like
He was
went
a
under
man,
a different name.
right?
Right.
So yeah, so like yeah, it would have been looked down upon, but he was still the dude, and he still I think retained his title, and I don't know, like I don't think money was a big issue. And also, things were just cheaper back then. Like,
Or it would have been easier to barter or to just like ask a random family, like, can I sleep here?
can I have like the equivalent to like 50 cents, which pays for like a lot, you know?
Okay. That's so interesting. And then the other thing that did come to mind was like how risky, but he did get beaten and robbed.
Yeah,
and stuff.
I mean, yeah, it wasn't like, you know, a cakewalk.
Yeah, wow.
But, you know, and this was even more insane. It's like, in spite of all of this, he returned to Syria the following year, so like in 1910, as part of an archaeological expedition sponsored by the British Museum. His years in the region deepened his knowledge of Arabic and the affinity for the Arab people, which again is key. And I want you guys to keep that in mind. So starting in 1910, Lawrence was offered the opportunity to become a practicing archaeologist at Carchemish, which is it's a pretty historic site in like present day Turkey.
Oh, very cool.
I think Turkey or just south of Turkey. I'm not exactly sure, but in the general Asia Minor area. And this is where he would meet and work with Leonard Woolley, who is known as like the father, or at least one of the fathers of modern archaeology.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the name.
Yeah. There's even a very cool picture from around 1912 where Lawrence and Woolley are standing next to an early Hittite artifact.
What?
I know, which, if you guys don't know, the Hittites were like an Indo-European group from the Bronze Age that we know very little about.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And so it's cool. Like, he added quite a bit of knowledge, I guess, to our understanding of that culture.
Wow.
Really cool. And I have literally wrote in my notes, pretty dope, if you ask me. It is dope, Andrew. Yes. So 1914 comes around. Pretty infamous year. And Lawrence's expedition team is co-opted secretly by the British Army because World War I is going to happen. I don't know if if co-opted before the outbreak of hostilities, but I mean, it was a powder keg. So it's probably that they were just waiting for something to happen, even if it was before the actual official outbreak. Long story short, they're surveying a desert that would be critical to the Ottoman Empire if they were to invade Egypt. And the British wanted to know everything they could about it, as Egypt was Britain's ally, or, rather, like, I don't know the full geopolitical context of it at this time, but it might have been like a protectorate of Britain, i.e. like almost like a colony.
Yes, it was part
light.
of the Commonwealth.
I think
right?
It was, yeah. It was something. It was complicated, but yeah. And of course, later that year, after hostilities had already been, had already outbroken, I guess, the Lawrence enlisted in the new Arab Bureau Intelligence Unit in Cairo, and he arrived there in December of 1914. It's brand new established portion of the British military designed to, kind of immerse themselves in the Arab people.
In the culture?
Yeah, and the culture, and more so like their and like understand like where like their political leanings are, like in the terms of the war, right? Because the Ottoman Empire is part of like the Axis powers, right? Along with like Germany and I don't know. My World War I knowledge is surprisingly not very good. But they were on the opposing side of Britain. Let's just put it very simply.
No, but it's funny you say that. I was thinking the same thing as you're talking about this. I was like, wow, I feel like it really wasn't emphasized nearly as much as World War II for probably a myriad of reasons. But I even remember in college, I took a whole class just on World War II.
Did you take like a class just on like fascism?
We had like a whole like section of that class was specifically on fascism. Yeah, and I had to do a report on it.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that World War I is like never talked about. But it's super interesting.
Yes.
But anyways, it's also important to note that like when Lawrence enlisted, he had zero military experience at this point, which is crazy considering we're going to talk about coming up.
Okay. Yeah, he's an archaeologist.
Yeah. So going into 1915, the situation was intense, I think, to say the very least. The disparate Arab peoples were starting to organize into a pan-Arab nationalist movement where in general they were very anti-Ottoman.
Okay.
They were under the leadership of Sharif Hussein, who was the emir of Mecca. I guess you could almost call him a king,
Okay.
king-like figure. And fun fact, he was the 37th generation of direct descendants from Muhammad.
What?
I know. How do you even track that?
Someone must have been keeping really, really good notes.
Yeah, that's insane.
37?
37th generation.
I wonder how I wonder how accurate that is, or if part of it is wrapped in legend at all,
Right.
or if there were records. If anyone knows that's listening,
Yeah.
let us know. That's super interesting.
It's very interesting. But yeah, there's a lot going
There's
on.
a lot going on in the world.
Basically, going back to kind of this pan-Arab group.
Yes.
Their ultimate goal was to create an independent Arab state.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of drama with this.
I'm sure.
So obviously the Ottomans, of course, didn't want this, but the British and the French, the Allied powers, I guess, they didn't really want this either.
No.
So no one
they
really
did not.
wanted this except for, the Arab peoples. Because
of course.
Because of course, right? Long story short, and you could almost do an entire episode on the back room dealings with this, because there is a lot, and I don't want to get mixed up in it. So in short, Hussein wanted British assurances that this was going to go down. And again, a lot of parties weren't keen on this, but eventually he threatened to ally with the Ottomans if they didn't agree, and they acquiesced.
Oh, wow. That's a bold move.
Yeah.
Worked out, though. Oh,
Yeah,
did it?
We'll see about that. Let's go back to Lawrence, though, before we do any more geopolitics. He had two brothers, and they unfortunately both died in 1915.
Wow.
Yeah.
Young.
And it was this guilt that Lawrence felt that made him leave his safe desk job in Cairo to join the front lines.
Oh, no.
At the outbreak of the Arab revolt in 1916. At the beginning of the revolt, Lawrence met with and interviewed Hussein's three sons, and this is very important.
Mm-hmm.
He was incredibly impressed with the youngest, the third son, Faisal, and suggested that he lead the military portions of the revolt.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of had that je ne sais quoi, that charisma.
Mm-hmm. Like a good leadership quality.
Exactly. And in late December 1916, Faisal and Lawrence worked out a plan for repositioning the Arab forces to prevent the Ottoman forces around the city of Medina from threatening Arab positions and putting the railway from Syria under threat. And this is important because this guides the strategy for the rest of the war, or the majority of the strategy. Lawrence's most important contributions to the Arab revolt were in this area of strategy and being the kind of the liaison between the British armed forces. But he was also, personally invested and worked on several military engagements, which included at least, but probably many more, a dozen incidents of literally destroying either railways or bridges and other civil constructions.
Oh my God.
He kind of became a self-taught munitions expert.
Wow.
Yeah, and he taught, and he almost broke this down to beyond a science. It was like an art for him because I think I wrote notes down a little bit later, but I just kind of want to go into it now because I think it makes more sense. He developed this way of destroying, the railway or bridge in a way where it's it's not completely destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
So the Ottomans would then have to come guard that and put in a lot of effort kind of deconstructing portions of it and then reconstructing it so that they could continue using it.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of outright just destroying it completely, where then it would just be abandoned and then Ottoman forces be rerouted elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so he got really good at that, and he taught Faisal, how to do this, and he replicated this strategy in multiple areas.
And to clarify, the point of that strategy is to disperse their efforts essentially,
Right, and
so that
it's-
they're not all solidifying in one place, but everyone's kind of distracted,
Exactly.
repairing different things. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of
Mhm.
like a style of like guerrilla warfare
Mm-hmm.
and like almost like damaging morale.
Mm-hmm.
That was-
Yeah, people are going to be tired. People are going to be sick of repairing these train tracks.
Yeah, imagine like be like, this is the third time I'm repairing this mofo. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it wasted resources, time, energy, and of course, money.
Yes.
So, and generally, he advised Faisal to avoid larger battles like, the pitched battles of old and instead opt for these non-regular guerrilla-like warfare.
Yeah.
And I'm going to read kind of what he said about the Bedouin forces. He said this, and this is a direct quote from him. The value of the tribes is defensive only, and their real sphere is guerrilla warfare. They are intelligent and very likely almost reckless, but too individualistic to endure commands or fight in line, or to help each other out. It would, I think, be possible to make an organized force out of them. The Hejaz War is one of the dervishes against regular forces, and we are on the side of the dervishes. Our textbooks do not apply to its conditions at all. So basically, he's saying that got to throw the textbooks out, in terms of warfare.
Play by a new playbook.
Play by a new, brand new playbook. And that's what they did.
Okay.
And it was clear that it was, advantageous to leave the major city of Medina, which is kind of like where they base their operations around, more or less, right? And they just left it alone rather than try to capture it. And then they had just continued attacking the railway, or the Hejaz railway in specific, because, and without permanently destroying it, just because, they wanted to tie up the Ottoman resources.
Okay.
And basically their the manpower, I guess, for lack of a better word. Again, in my notes, I put real smart.
Real smart.
They definitely chief of strategizing right here.
Mm-hmm.
And, fun fact, you can still to this day go to the Wadi Rum Desert and see a train that was blown up by T.E. Lawrence.
Really?
Yeah.
That sounds fun.
It's over 100 years old, and it's a beautiful desert.
Did you look up pictures?
I did.
Oh,
It was
very
pretty cool. Yeah.
I want to see.
And again, remember how I told you there was a lot of backroom intrigue going on? I feel like this is probably the time to talk about it. So back in England, the British, French, Russian, and Italian governments had been in secret talks on how to partition the Ottoman Empire's lands once the war was over.
Okay.
This was in stark contrast to the interests of the Pan-Arab League,
Yeah.
as the proposed Arab state would be relegated to basically the deserts of Arabia alone, while the English and French would get the richer parts of Mesopotamia and Syria. Naughty,
The more
naughty.
fertile lands.
Right.
Oh, gosh.
I know. Long story short, Lawrence eventually found out about this. We don't know at what time. It's a little bit nebulous, but we do know that he told Faisal about it, I think, fairly shortly afterwards. That's kind of traditionally what we think, but again, that's not for certain. But even telling Faisal was like borderline treasonous offense.
Mm-hmm.
And again, to me, this really showed the true nature of his character. And, we'll get into his character, I think more, throughout the story. But again, it kind of showed where his kind of allegiance lied.
He's
it wasn't,
honorable.
yeah, he wasn't just blindly devoted to Britain, right? Even though he was British.
Right. He knew what they were doing was wrong.
Right, exactly.
And told his friend what was happening.
Hey, by the way, I think you're going to get screwed over.
Yeah.
But let's focus on his activities during the last part of the war. So 1917, Lawrence took part in what would be the most important part of his involvement in the First World War, and was probably the high point. So that his Arab forces, of pretty irregular troops, took the city of Aqaba, which is on the northeastern coast of the Red Sea in present-day Jordan. Absolutely incredible victory because it was very important strategic location, and they took it over land, which the Ottoman forces were not expecting. It would have made much more sense to have a sea assault.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just like, oh my God, they had no idea this was happening. And yeah, again, I have to mention that the fact that it was done with Arab irregular troops makes the victory even more impressive. But shortly after, he also experienced probably what would be his low point.
Lawrence?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
He was captured near the town of Dara, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's not important because oh God, this is bad. He was sexually assaulted by his captors. Yeah. Lawrence would later describe the experience as such, and this is a direct quote.
Wait.
Yeah.
People, if you don't want to hear, right, they could just like skip.
Yeah.
Go ahead, like 30 seconds.
Yeah, go ahead 30 seconds. You don't want to hear this. But he said, in Dara, that night, the citadel of my integrity had been irrevocably lost.
That's so sad.
Yeah. Luckily, I suppose, he escaped shortly afterwards, but I think he endured these experiences that left him both physically and psychologically, quote, damaged, right?
Right. Of course, that's not something you get over on your own in a short amount of time, or just because you left that situation doesn't mean that it's not with you. Amazing that where did you find that quote? Where did he share this experience? Do you know?
Oh, yes. It's in quite a famous book. I'll get to that later, I promise. Yeah.
It's amazing that for a man of his time to share that he was assaulted. Sexual assault is very hard to disclose, obviously, for so many reasons, and for men to disclose, they're very rarely believed.
And especially like 100 years ago.
Yeah. I'm really surprised that he shared that, but who knows what good that did for someone reading that who at least felt less alone.
Right.
Wow. Very incredible.
I know. I was like, oof, that sucks.
We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end,
What will I become? Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
So after this point, his exploits in the war aren't as well known.
Okay.
So we know by the end of the year, 1917, he took part in a victory parade in Jerusalem. And, at the following year, at the conclusion of the war, he saw the Arab victory in securing the city of Damascus. Excuse me. But by this point, he was just utterly exhausted.
Yeah.
I think he probably had what we would now call PTSD.
Yeah.
I think they called it shell shock. I'm not even sure if that was even if that's what they called it then.
He could have also had some moral injury.
I think so, because I think also he wrote later on that he had to commit some like what he would call atrocities as well.
Yeah. And so moral injury, to distinguish for anyone who's listening, is often when your belief system is shattered or altered or changed in some way. And it is common for people in war because you go often thinking that you're there to do good, right? That your nation, that your government, that whatever, this entity is sending you there for freedom, for democracy, for whatever it is.
Right.
And then when you do things that you're commanded or put in a situation where you are required to do things that are morally icky, for lack of a better word, it changes your belief system. So it sounds like that's what he was going through a lot. In addition to probably the trauma from being assaulted and the trauma of being involved in war. And
it's a very prescient analysis because it'll make, that kind of lines up exactly with what will happen.
Oh, okay.
Even after the war.
Mm-hmm.
He had basically seen the worst that war had to offer, right?
Yes.
And, to make matters worse, he also saw the petty factionalism that had set in within the Arab peoples once the war was already over, like immediately. And it was like, oh, come on, guys.
Right. He was fighting with them.
And then now they're kind of squabbling with each other already.
Painful to watch.
And of course, this did not help their case for an independent, solidified Arab state, right? And so he was disheartened and disillusioned at this time. And he not only left for home, but he refused a knighthood from the King of England himself.
Oh my God.
He politely, but he was not down.
Wow.
And again, I think this really spoke to his character. And I'm going to quote history.com.
Okay.
And it said, quote, believing that the British government had betrayed the Arabs by reneging on a promise of independence, Lawrence quietly told the befuddled monarch, the King of England, that he was refusing the honor before turning away and walking out of the palace.
Wow. He really had his morals very clear.
Yes.
Very, very honorable. Very Jon Snow-like.
Very Jon Snow.
Mm-hmm.
Game of Thrones. R.I.P. Lawrence's story, or rather the parts of the story that we are covering today is coming to a close. But before we get there, there's some more things that I want to cover. And I think it's important that we talk about who he was as a person.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've already started that conversation, but I think I did so much research on him, and it seemed like he was probably one of the most honorable people I have ever read up on. Like it was insane. Like, and it was incredibly clear that he had a very deep admiration for the Arab people and really sympathized with their plight.
Mm-hmm.
And for instance, he dressed in like traditional chic, Arab garb, right, with the long robes and the cool, like, I don't even know what to call it, like a cool, like, kind of a hat.
Mm-hmm. Just the traditional headwear.
Yeah, we'll post pictures like on our Instagram where you can see it, but it's he wrote how much he loved the Middle East, and he even wrote this about the desert. The abstraction of the desert landscape cleansed me.
Wow. So he found like almost like a soul connection there.
He did, yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, very, the timing of this is pretty neat, because these were some partly like the words like that he wrote here inspired the main character Paul Atreides in the hit science fiction series Dune.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
That's so funny. You just watched it
and
the
I just
other
watched
day.
that the other day. So I was like, wow. And also Atreides, fun fact, is based off of the mythological Greek house of Agamemnon.
From
the Iliad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, this just like this whole portion of me is kind of just analyzing, but like it seemed like Lawrence came, both came alive in the desert, but also kind of came undone.
Wow.
Yeah, like two things like almost happened simultaneously.
Very poetic.
Yeah. After the war, he lobbied for Arab independence in the full Arab garb at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. But this, of course, was to no avail.
He really walked the talk.
He did.
It sounds like he didn't just romanticize or even like fetishize like the Middle East and the culture, because he's obviously very well educated in it and its history and in the modern political issues of the people.
Right.
He really must have felt so connected to their cause.
Yeah. I think so. I really do think he did. He was.
That's so interesting to me, because this is obviously a gross generalization in and of itself, but I just feel like particularly like Western European people throughout history, but particularly of this time, I think the general, and the US, like the Western culture, I think we have often to this day seen ourselves as like the way we do it is obviously the right way.
Right.
How refreshing to hear about someone who could appreciate another way of life and advocate for it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it comes down to like he was a history dude.
Right.
Right. He loved it. And he saw, he researched so much, and he saw like, the way we do it now is only a sliver of like the whole human experience.
That's why history is so important.
Boom. Listen to our history podcast.
It's so true, though. I honestly think this is mushy, but part of why I love learning about history is even the weird stories, right? Even when we get into like really silly or goofy or creepy ones even, I feel like it reminds me of how similar and connected and the shared experiences that we have across time, across culture, across the globe.
Right.
Very cool.
I think so too. I love it, obviously. Because guess what, though? It wasn't too much later until he was back in the Middle East in 1921.
For a good reason?
more or less.
Mm-hmm.
He was not for warfare at least.
That's good.
That's good. I think he was
Upgrade.
tired of it.
Yeah.
He was wooed back to the Middle East as an advisor on Arab affairs to the colonial minister, a man.
Mm-hmm.
You may have heard of him. His name was Winston Churchill.
I once met an English bulldog named Winston Churchill. Is that who you're referring to?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes. Yeah. And, he stayed in the area. And
This is how real Lawrence of Arabia was. He knew Winston Churchill.
yeah,
Truly, they feel like they're from different times.
they do. Like
In my
Lawrence,
head.
when I think of Lawrence of Arabia, I think of like some like fantasy figure.
It almost feels ancient.
Yeah, like
for
a
some
fantasy
reason.
from
Yeah.
like almost like, I don't know, like the early Bronze Age, maybe even before. Like,
It's so
I don't know.
weird.
It's crazy, but it sounds like time travel thing.
Yeah.
And he stayed in this area at one time, and then at one time, excuse me, he enlisted in the Royal Air Force under an assumed name because I think he was already famous at this point, but
Wow.
not as famous as he would get.
Oh my God.
But he was pretty famous. And so I think, he was writing a book at the time. So ostensibly this was to have more time for his book.
What?
Not really sure.
He joined the Air Force to have more time to write his book?
Yeah, I don't really know.
That sounds like me logic or something. Like I would do something really weird and dumb like that.
Exactly, yeah. But, eventually they found out and he was like discharged. Yeah, because like Royal Air Force was like embarrassed.
They're like, go write your book, sir.
Yeah.
Stop procrastinating.
Also, fun fact,
Mhm.
again, this makes me like him even more. He published his own English translation of Homer's Odyssey under the pen name of T.E. Shaw and maintained the assumed name until his death.
Wow.
Yeah.
He could do stuff like that?
Yeah. And I'm not even going to tell you how young he was at this time.
Tell me.
He was like in his 30s.
Ugh, whatever, dude.
Yeah, he was like in his 20s when he was doing all these things like helping overthrow the empire that took down the last bastion of the Roman Empire. Let's just let that
Right.
sink in for a second.
And he's in his 20s.
And he was in his 20s.
Jeez Louise. Well, we made a podcast.
Boom. Take that, Lawrence. Yeah. But, speaking of works, I think it's time to mention his magnum opus, The 7 Pillars of Wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And this was one of the few works from the 20th century, and I think maybe the only work in English from that time period that makes an epical figure out of a contemporary, which is insane. Like, he is a modern day epic figure.
Yeah. That's crazy.
And also it's very, very apt that he wrote about wrote like his own version of the Odyssey.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's also an epic figure.
Yes.
So, I mean, he literally is a real life, like living or, used to be living like a hero's journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unbelievable. And of course, he's also the basis, and this work is the basis of the 1962 classic movie Lawrence of Arabia starring Peter O'Toole, which became an instant classic and is to this day still considered a cinematic masterpiece, winning, I think, Best Picture and Best Actor.
Oh my God. Yeah, I've heard of the movie. I've never seen it. But
Right.
I know it's like a classic for a reason.
It's almost 4 hours long.
Oh.
So I kind of want to see it, but at the same time, I kind of don't.
I think we would need to just do it over a weekend and do like Friday night, 2 hours, Saturday night, 2 hours or something.
I think so. It is. I think it's in 2 parts. So actually,
Okay, that
there's
makes
an
sense.
intermission. So we could.
There needs to be when it's 4 hours
I mean,
long.
that's insane.
Yeah.
4 hours. It's like technically, I think 3 hours, and like 48 minutes, but still, regardless. So here's how Encyclopedia Britannica describes the movie. Though overpopulated with adjectives and often straining for effects and art, it is nevertheless an action-packed narrative of Lawrence's campaigns in the desert with the Arabs. The book is replete with incident and spectacle, filled with rich character portrayals and a tense introspection that bears the author's own complex mental and spiritual transformation.
Wow.
Though admittedly inexact and subjective, it combines the scope of heroic epic with the closeness of autobiography.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
So
quite a review.
yeah, they basically kind of described it in a sense, but it's not the most historically accurate movie in the world.
Oh, that's what they were trying to say?
Let's just say that. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. But also, kind of fun fact, that guy Peter O'Toole,
Yes.
he plays King Piram in the Troy movie with Brad Pitt.
He plays King Piram in the Troy movie with Brad Pitt. I've never seen that.
Oh yeah, no, that's the movie we're supposed to see, and
Oh, yeah.
for some reason we never am able to.
We keep moving it
Yeah,
around.
I remember seeing that when I was like 12 and was like, "Oh, this is the sickest movie ever."
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Also, everyone who's listening, I'm reading the Song of Achilles, so
Yeah.
it's kind of like relevant.
Yes, I read it and then I was like, you have to read this. It's so good.
Speaking
So,
of instant classics, right?
yeah, instant classic novel. If anyone hasn't read it, I really recommend it. It's very poetic writing, really cool for like history nerds.
Yeah. And I think she is a classicist, so like she understands.
She is, yeah.
Yeah.
And she took, Madeline Miller is her name, I believe. She took 10 years to write it or something.
Damn.
Crazy. Like so much research. And she professionally translates works from like ancient Greek and ancient Latin.
Yeah. No big deal.
No big deal. We have a podcast.
Okay. So back to Lawrence. We do know that he became somewhat of an author, obviously, during this time, but not much is known about him in later years. So he did work for the RAF, but it was not allowed to fly, and it was discharged on February 26, 1935. He felt both optimistic about future publishing work and a sense of emptiness at the same time.
Oh my God, dude.
I know. I was like, damn, dude.
If he feels empty, I don't know what I feel.
To a friend, he described himself as puttering about as if there is something broken in the works. My will, I think. And I was like, oh, my
Yeah.
poor baby.
Think of everything he endured and that isn't being addressed at that time. You know, mental health is far from being a topic
I know.
that
And
people think about.
I think he accomplished so much so quickly that it's like, what now?
What now? And the trauma, right? Like still
Yeah.
living with the side effects, the symptoms of that. Oh my God.
I know.
That does sound hard.
Well, unfortunately, 2.5-ish months later, on May 13th of that year, 1935, he was in a motorcycle accident and died 6 days later at the age of 46.
So young.
So young. And tragically, and in speaking of which, in my mind, he became a full-blown Shakespearean tragic character.
Yeah.
Like,
wow.
Shakespearean epic tragedy.
Mhm.
And it's insane. And I'm just gonna there is just a few words that I wanted to say, but I think Encyclopedia Britannica just does a better job of saying those words. So I'm just gonna read directly what they said about him.
Go for it.
Lawrence became a mythic figure in his own lifetime, even before he published his own version of his legend in the 7 Pillars of Wisdom. His accomplishments themselves were solid enough for several lives. More than a military leader, an inspirational force behind the Arab revolt against the Turks, he was a superb tactician and a highly influential theoretician of guerrilla warfare. Besides the 7 Pillars of Wisdom, his sharply etched service chronicle, The Mint, and his mannered prose translation of the Odyssey added to a literary reputation further substantiated by an immense correspondence that establishes him as one of the major letter writers of his generation. Lawrence found despair as necessary as ambition. He lived on the masochistic side of asceticism, and part of his self-punishment involved creating within himself a deep frustration to immediately follow and cancel out high achievement by denying to himself the recognition he had earned. At its most extreme, this impulse involved a symbolic killing of the self, a taking up of a new life and a new name. Under whatever guise, he was a many-sided genius whose accomplishments precluded the privacy he constantly sought. By the manufacture of his myth, however solidly based, he created in his own person a characterization rivaling any in contemporary fiction.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm kind of at a loss for words.
Mm-hmm. He was definitely a multi-passionate person.
Yeah.
very intelligent, very talented. It does make me sad, though, that he felt the need to be like the tragic, suffering artist.
Yeah.
Or maybe he didn't feel the need isn't the right way to say it, but that befell him.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm here to tell you, therapist Stephanie comes out. You don't need to suffer for your art,
Yeah.
It sounds almost like he felt nothing he did was ever good enough and he wasn't worthy of enjoying his awesomeness.
I think that you're exactly right.
Which we all should do. We should all celebrate ourselves and recognize what we've done. Because imagine, he died so young and tragically. I wish he had enjoyed the amazing things he did.
Yeah. It's really sad.
Mm-hmm.
But, that is the amazingly tragic life of T.E. Lawrence, or better known as Lawrence of Arabia. And again, based upon everything I read, it really makes sense how I didn't know he was an actual real person until college, because everything he did, that was just insane.
He became a historical character while alive.
Right.
So yeah, it makes perfect sense that neither of us knew for a very long time that he was a real life person.
He was like an ancient hero in modern times.
Yes.
And I mean hero in the sense of the Bronze Age heroes, right?
Yeah.
Or the heroes of classical antiquity.
Mm-hmm.
Insane.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that story.
Thank you. And before I forget sources,
mm-hmm.
It's been a long time since I've forgotten them. So first of all, history.com. It was incredible. A great article on him. Smithsonian Magazine had an amazing, almost biopic on him.
Oh, cool.
They interviewed he was the grandson of Faisal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So even in its own right, that's a really interesting article, because
Yes.
it centers on T. Lawrence, but goes into other directions as well.
Mm-hmm.
PBS had some good stuff on him. Encyclopedia Britannica coming in hot with the dramatism.
Really?
Yeah. Well, based off everything I read, that was straight from them.
Oh, right. They
And
really
then,
were passionate.
My favorite, of course, Wikipedia.
Perfect. They help us fill in the gaps.
They really do. They really do.
Support Wikipedia.
Yeah, I know. I give I think I gave $20 this year.
I give, every year I'll give a few just because I've relied on them since high school to get through life.
Been around forever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have to take a deep breath because that was intense.
Yeah. Thank you for reading that and for sharing that. I know you aren't feeling well also. I didn't know how long it would be, and you must be so tired.
Yeah, I'm pretty exhausted, but I think it's just such an interesting story, and I felt so connected to him. I don't know why. Maybe because he was also a history nerd.
Right.
And I just was and he also was a history nerd, but he created history as well, and I think that's so cool.
Yes, usually you think of, and this is a stereotype we can all break, but I do think there is the stereotype of someone who's interested in history or is a historian as being an observer rather than an action taker.
Yeah.
And he was both. Very unique combination.
I think it's definitely inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
Inspiration for me. Well, that is all I have for you.
Yay!
And I hope you guys, you weirdos, I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you guys for listening. You know the drill, our friends. Thank you so much, first of all, to everyone who emails us, DMs us, leaves comments. We appreciate you so, so much. Please leave a review, share the podcast with a friend, subscribe, because those things help get the podcast out to other weirdos who would like to listen to us ramble about things that we find interesting with each other. But thank you all so much, and until next time, weirdos.
Adios, weirdos.